Thanks, Rico. I was introduced to Plone kind of indirectly by a friend of mine. At the time, he introduced me to the Zope world. And, we were talking about it, and he told me about this thing called World Pilot. World Pilot is a fairly fancy email system for the time, and he was really excited about it, and I actually tried it out myself, and that led me into the Zope ecosystem. At least that's how I remember it. We didn't have masks though, and I definitely wasn't holding a guitar. But one of the products of the Zope ecosystem was Plone. And at the time, I was coming from HTML, PHP world, and this stuff was like superpowers, the stuff that I was able to do with very little knowledge. So I was able to show people these things that I was doing with Zope and by extension Plone, and it was great. Frameworks can be fun, but they can also be weird and unexpected. And this talk is about a framework. It's not so much about Plone, but yeah, Plone, but not really. My name is David Bain, and online I'm usually found under the name Pigeon Flight at most places. And I want to talk to you about a repeatable approach to learning, and hopefully it will help you to survive some of the weird and unexpected that you come across. And this will be presented through the lens of my Plone experience. This is roughly what we're going to be going through. A little bit of definition, talking about asking, talking about answering, and keeping notes. Of course, the last two very briefly. So let's talk about ask first, which is a very Jamaican way of pronouncing ask first. And we're talking about asking questions for the benefit of your future self. And of course, we need a fun made-up name for the talk, so we'll talk about ask first. The hardest parts of learning a new technology or framework are getting started with new tooling and learning about build and deploy processes. And this is not my perspective. This is 45% of developers surveyed at a website called codeproject.com. Here's something else that's difficult: wrapping your head around a new way of completing things that you already knew how to do. And 42% of the developers surveyed in response to this concern said this was a challenge. And you know what was not a challenge? Most developers are not in this boat. That only 1% said that they never have to learn new technologies. So Ask First as a framework is about problem solving and learning. So think of it as adding a little bit of structure to that. And from my perspective, I see three things. I see asking, answering, and keeping notes. So as I said before, these are the components of the Ask First framework. They're about asking, answering, and keeping notes. So let's go into the meat of the matter. How do we go about asking good questions and avoid asking horrible and revealing questions? This is my personal thing. I've coined this idea of a revealing question, and when I talk about a revealing question, I'm talking about questions that demonstrate no attempt to grasp the context or model. We're encouraged to ask questions. They even have kids shows where they have songs about how questions can be useful and encouraging kids to ask questions. So what is this idea of a revealing question? Well, it's a question that says to the listener that you really haven't stopped to think about the model, or you don't understand the model. So for example, the example that I give, um, and this has changed now with self-driving cars, but let's say a couple years back, you've reached somewhere, there's a car, you drove it, and now you can't find your car keys. And somebody who wants to be helpful asks the following question. Do you think you left it at home? Now you can see there's a problem with that question, because there are a lot of reasons why, if you understood the model, you would not ask that question. So let's see if we can help you to ask more useful questions that will help your future self as well as others. Here's an example of a revealing question. This is a fictional one, but it's based on, and maybe exaggerated, but it's based on questions I've seen in forums. I'm trying to get Plone to make my website. Where do I go in Photoshop to publish a news item? My employer needs me to do this. I saw something on the web that did Plone. Just the use of language here, just clear, and how they're attributing the idea of Photoshop publishing news items. It's clear that they haven't quite grasped the model. It's okay if you haven't grasped the model, but it's important that while you're in the process of grasping the model, that you make it clear. So you could change this question and make it quite reasonable by saying, my current understanding is that Photoshop is used to publish news items. That makes it easier for someone responding to say, your current understanding might not be quite right. So here's the type of response you might get from a user if you ask a question like this. You know, this question makes no sense. Please do not post messages while drunk. And we've seen responses like this in the Plone forum. So how do we get our questions to be a little better structured so that we can get the most out of the Plone community, and I guess give the most to the Plone community? Here are my 3 things. A clear title, state your issue, and also mention what you tried. This is a template. Sometimes you don't use all of these bits, and we'll talk about that a little more, but this is a good kind of starting point to guide you in asking a well-structured question. Here's an actual question that I asked a couple years ago. I'm working on a hack to edit individual member data. The principle seems sound, but I seem to be missing something. Basically, I've hacked the personalized script and personalized form. From the above files, I've created 2 new files, personalized proxy and personalized form proxy. Now, this was 2003. We were still doing through the web and I'm forgetting what it's called, but Plone customizations through the web. And we would copy scripts inside of the ZMI and things like that. So that's the context of this question. So I have a title that hopefully is clear. I have stated my issue. I'm working on a hack to edit individual member data. And I've stated what I tried. Now I've shortened the question. I put some more detail, like a code sample of the contents of the personalized proxy and personalized form proxy. But the point is, we have the elements. The title, the emoji is optional, but sometimes it's useful to maybe let people know how you're feeling. And here's the actual response to that question. I have some code for this that will allow you to edit arbitrary user member data. So this is great. This person has code. Of course, they haven't posted the code and they're going to get back to it a little later and hopefully email me or something. But that's good. So as well-structured question, you're not guaranteed that you'll get a great answer, but it increases the odds and it reduces the risk of getting blasted by persons in the forum. I've thought about types of questions. Not every question is alike. So you have the how might I question, the work in progress style question, and the help me plan question. And each one of these questions takes slightly different form. This is not a comprehensive list, but it's a good start. Here is a how might I question, and this was something that I wrote in the mailing lists in 2004. The title, persistent logging. So you know what we're going to be talking about. How can I create a persistent login for my users? Similar to some of the more popular forum products, which allow users to choose to stay logged in for a day, a week, a month, forever, etc. Once they access the site using the same computer, they remain logged in. This is purely for convenience. I wouldn't recommend this if you're interested in security. So that's a question. I left out question marks, but yeah. So I've stated the issue, and sometimes I don't do this, but I try most of the time to make my issue the first thing, because someone who's reading this in a rush can know right away, oh, create a persistent login for my users. And then the rest of it gives you a little context about what I mean. There's my clear title. Oh, and a note, in this particular slide, I didn't do step 3, which is to say what I've tried so far. So, and that's probably because at that point, either I hadn't tried it or maybe I was feeling a little bit lazy and didn't mention what I had tried yet. Okay. Let's look at that question I asked in the previous example, but from the perspective of a work in progress question. So I'm working on a hack to edit individual member data. That was question, and of course that's the issue. And let's see how people responded to my question. Oh, sorry, I don't think I gave an example here. So this is just an example of work in progress for me to say I'm working on a hack to edit individual member data. And you recall when I went through this earlier that I explained about the personalized proxy scripts and so on. So it's work in progress because I included those personalized proxy scripts. Here is a help me plan question. Is Rapido a dead end? Now, in this case, I did write the title as a question. Most of the time, I actually don't write the title as a question, but sometimes this helps to be a little provocative and get attention. So I said I have 2 sites that are using a product built on Rapido. I've stopped building new things with it as I don't know what the situation is with Rapido at this point. Is it a dead end? Now, a couple things about this question. It's a little out of the standard structure, so I didn't put right up at the top, is it a dead end, which is a question I want to ask. So you have some flexibility, but at least understand the structure before you start breaking the structure. Person in response, I believe it is. There is a security problem with it and it's stopped being developed. And they gave me a recommendation. I've switched to using theme fragments. I actually also switched to using theme fragments, and I still had a few Rapido projects around. Good titles. So here's a little bit about choosing good titles. Generally, you want to make it a good summary, and it should enhance the understanding of the question that you're asking. Titles that I've used, just so you can just get an idea. Looking for a newsletter solution. Docker and Plone for add-on development. Is Diazo a dead end? Is Rapido a dead end? Sort by order, position in parent for collections. That's a mouthful, but it's very specific about what I want. I want to sort by the order of the position in the parent. Where do you ask your questions? Well, at this point in time, the only place I recommend is community.plone.org. This has changed over time because there was the mailing list. There was Stack Overflow. At one point, a good place to get answers was IRC. And maybe in the future, Slack. I have some reservations about asking questions in real-time chat. And that is because your future self may not get the logged information, and you won't benefit from it years later. A lot of the IRC conversations, I don't even know where to find them now. And I suppose something similar may happen with Slack if you're trying to get all of your answers in Slack. Let's talk about answering questions. And as I said, the next couple sections are far briefer than the first section, than the asking questions section. So these are my thoughts on answering. As much as possible, when you're answering, you're also answering for your future self. So make it as easy as possible for your future self. What I mean by that is you may answer your own question, and that has happened to me. I'm trying to get something done, and then I come back 2 hours later and I've made some progress. I'm going to almost use it like a journal and answer my question right there. If it has a good title and a clear question, 2 years from now, when I'm trying to tackle the same problem, I'll be able to find it. Here's an example of an actual question from 2018 and how I went about answering it. So why do we have Plone CLI and Bob templates.plone? And the person says, I still didn't grasp why do we have two packages that are intended to do the same thing? Did we have a discussion about Plone CLI here in the forums? Right, because from their perspective, these two things do the same thing. So they're conflicting. And this was my response. And I just screenshotted my response on purpose. Plone CLI provides a user-friendly wrapper around bobtemplates.plone. So Plone CLI is a consumer of bobtemplates.plone. So I wanted to point out how they were related, and I gave I showed the command line. I thought that would be important, and when you're showing code or things on the command line, it's always important to format it properly. So you can see where I'm commenting versus where I'm showing commands. That's really, really useful. Let's move on to keeping notes. I have kept a blog for a long time. I haven't really been doing much blogging recently. But keeping a blog is a great way to go. What I've been doing more, maybe in the last 2 years, is just sharing in the forums. So if not just questions, but I'll mention I'm doing this and just mention it in the forums and give it a title. That means that, 2 years from now, when I totally forget how to do it, I can come back and find that information. So you want to share what you're learning. Your future self will thank you. Here's an example of something from my blog. This was about the time when we were cutting over to Plone 5, and I was starting to prepare to kind of wrap my head around how Plone 5 worked. We're at a similar transition now where we're transitioning to Plone 6 and Volto. So maybe for my future self, I should be putting together an article on best practices or how to be ready for Volto. Okay, so let's review. Try to avoid revealing questions. You really want to make sure that either you understand the model or you're very honest that you're in the process of learning the model. Don't be lazy and just ask questions that are completely, with no reflection. Structure your questions using the title, issue, and what you tried approach. Use good titles. And when you are using code, use code, not screenshots, like the answer that I showed there. Share what you're learning. And your future self loves notes. So just always focus on making sure that the notes that you're putting out there will be valuable to your future self. Interestingly, when you do that, they also become valuable to the other people in the community. A few more takeaways. Think long term. You don't want to always need the answer in the next 5 minutes. Things move around. So things were on the mailing list at one point, and then they were in Stack Overflow. But most stuff happens at community.plone.org now. And be prepared if it has to move again. You really want to invest time formulating your question. So clearly state your problem, show that you're trying and have tried, and share what you've tried. And if for no other reason, if you're having a challenge, articulating the issues and what you've been doing sometimes helps you to resolve the challenge, which is sometimes referred to as rubber duck debugging, which you can Google that. I sometimes like to think of it this way. I'm about to try something. This is my question. I'm about to try something. Stop me if that's a bad idea. So by asking the question and sharing where you're going and what you've done, hopefully someone who's answering will be able to point out a better idea and stop you if you're going in down the wrong direction. Thank you for your time. I did not update the template here, so my username is Pigeon Flight, and you can find me in Slack for the conference. I use that handle pretty much everywhere online.
Thank you, David. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Actually, first of all, I have to thank you because I have no idea how many times I asked myself something. I wrote the question on Google. I landed on your question on communities.org. And
Okay.
you answer that. So that's amazing. I love when you do that. But you mentioned blogging. Why you're not blogging that often? And do you think for some of us, answering questions on Stack Overflow, answering questions on community.plone.org became the new blogging, the way we basically help ourselves in the future, instead of going back to your blog and writing how to use screen? That's a real situation for me.
Yeah.
Every time I go back to my blog. But now we have these other platforms that basically they became the note taking place for us. Do you think it's something like that, or do you have a different reasoning?
Well, for me, My blogging has started to migrate and also change in nature. So I don't like Blogger anymore. So it's not fun to blog on Blogger. It's easier to put notes in community.plone.org. If I cut and paste an image, it will sort it out for me. It's just a nice experience. So some of my blogging has migrated to Medium.
Okay.
Because Medium is just nicer for blogging. And it's also changed in nature. So I've blogged about learning sales and marketing and design sprints and product development, which, you know, it didn't quite fit as nicely on my main blog, but Medium gave me the opportunity to just, whatever I'm thinking about, I blog. So in my presentation, even though I said I haven't been blogging much, I am doing some blogging. It's just the long form has changed to be more of, you know, stuff I'm reflecting on and stuff I'm doing. Yeah.
Perfect.